Good evening, and welcome to the Arkansas Association of Black Psychology Professionals Town Hall Series 3, Ways to Refresh the Soul. I am Pat Griffin, clinical psychologist and one of the founding members of AABPP, and I will serve as your moderator tonight. In May of 2020, the Arkansas Association of Black Psychology Professionals launched a series of town hall meetings for the Black community on ways to navigate the dual pandemics of COVID-19 and racism. Tonight's town hall meeting, The Power of Spirituality for Coping During the Dual Pandemics of COVID-19 and Racism, is a relevant and timely topic for these perilous times that we're living through today. Our guests tonight are Dr. Annette Slater, psychiatrist, Christian educator, and First Lady at Mount Pleasant Missionary Baptist Church, and also Dr. Harold Betton, family practice physician, founder of Betton Family Clinic, and the pastor of New Light Missionary Baptist Church. Welcome, Dr. Slater, and welcome, Dr. Betton.
Thank you.
As an aside, I have a long history with both of our guests. It seems like it was only a few years ago that we were members of a young adult Bible study group. Just a few years ago. The time has gone by so quickly, but we've all continued our respective journeys on this path. Although both of our guests are well known in the Little Rock community, we have several joining us by Facebook who may not be as familiar with our guests as our Little Rock community is. So I want to formally introduce our guest. Dr. Slater completed her medical training at the University of Arkansas Medical School and completed a tour. I think someone needs to mute. I'm hearing some background noise. Let me start again. Dr. Slater completed her medical training at the University of Arkansas Medical School and completed a tour of duty as General Medical Officer for the U.S. Army. She served 25 years at the Veterans Affairs Healthcare System in various positions and was instrumental in implementing the mental health services at 8 VA community-based outpatient clinics. She retired from the VA and now is working for Mid-South Health Systems. She is providing services through telehealth in East Arkansas and considers her vocation her ministry. I like that. Her vocation is her ministry. She's been active in the field of psychiatry for over 40 years, providing services to underserved populations. Dr. Slater is the First Lady at Mount Pleasant Missionary Baptist Church, where her husband, Dr. James Slater, is pastor. At Mount Pleasant, she serves as the director of Christian education, teaches Sunday school, and has also taught classes on Christian education at Union District Congress. She is a member of the Arkansas Medical Dental Pharmaceutical Association, the Little Rock chapter of Links, Inc., and Delta Sigma Theta. The Slaters have one son, Michael, and 4 grandchildren. Thank you for being with us tonight, Dr. Slater.
Thank you.
The Reverend Dr. Harold Betton completed his undergraduate degree at the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville, taught 2 years at AM&N, now UAPB. Dr. Betton completed his medical degree at the University of Washington School of Medicine in Seattle. Upon completion of his residency in family medicine, Dr. Betton relocated to Little Rock, Arkansas, established his practice at the Betton Family Clinic. For 5 years, he served as associate minister at Mount Zion Baptist Church, his home church. And for the past 28 years, he has been the pastor of New Light Missionary Baptist Church here in Little Rock. Dr. Betton completed a master's degree and a PhD in biblical studies. He is on the Religious Studies faculty at Arkansas Baptist College. And as a matter of fact, he just finished teaching his class at Arkansas Baptist College before joining this Zoom. Busy people are busy people. He formerly was a faculty member at Howard University in DC, where he was co-director of the Spirituality and Medicine Seminary. Dr. Beddon has written 4 books on spirituality and medicine and 2 books in the field of biblical studies. He and his wife, Rochelle, are the parents of 2 children, both attorneys, and 6 grandchildren. Thank you, Dr. Beddon, for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
And what a lineup we have for you tonight. Dr. Beddon and Dr. Slater bring to us a combined total of over 80 years of service in the health professions here in Arkansas. And we are tremendously grateful to each of you for taking time out of your busy schedule. Dr. Slater just finished seeing her last patient at 5:30, so these are busy people. Just busy. But we thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to speak to our community tonight on spirituality, the power of spirituality for coping during these perilous times. And we invite members from our listening audience by Facebook or by Zoom to submit any questions that you have in the chat or on the Facebook page. Hopefully we'll be able to get to some of those questions later on. We recently watched the PBS documentary on the Black church. This is our story, this is our song by Henry Louis Gates. This raises a question in our mind, and that is the question of spirituality. What about spirituality and the Black community? For openers, Dr. Slater and Dr. Beddon, I would like for you to each just briefly share your thoughts on the role and impact of spirituality in the lives of the Black community in America. And Dr. Slater, we'll start with you. Please share with us, as a part of your opening comments on this rich topic, spirituality in the lives of Black Americans.
Well, thank you, Pat. You know, when you first asked me to think about this topic, obviously the impact of spirituality is such a big deal in our community. And, you know, I was thinking about it in terms of mental health. If you actually do a poll, 78% of African Americans are going to say that they're Protestants. Only 1% are going to say that they're atheists. That means the other 21% are Catholic or Islamic. So African Americans believe in a power higher than themselves. And so even if they only go to church on, what do they say, Christmas, Easter, and Mother's Day, even if they cuss all the time and they know they drink too much, they still believe in God. They still believe in a power higher than themselves. And when you think about our tradition of taking care of ourselves, we have done that through our churches. Now, if you grew up at the time that I grew up, everything was centered around the church. There twice on Sunday, and then we were back on Wednesday, and then, you know, anytime there was a community meeting or anything that had to do with it, we were there. And so we knew who the leaders were, and they had a really great impact on our lives. So our resilience, our creativity, our instincts to survive, I consider spirituality one of the components of what I call our psychological fortitude. And when we were being, I still actually remember going to a doctor's office where we went in a different door and we could see the other side of the waiting room, and you could see the people coming and going, and they got taken care of first. So I remember that. So this absence of the dignity that we couldn't get there, We got it in our own communities. I still remember my grandmother saying, go out there and get me some Jimson weed for my swollen feet. All of these skills were in the community, and it was part of who we were as African Americans.
Right. And that, of course, is a rich heritage. I like that term that you use, psychological fortitude. And I want to put an asterisk beside that as we continue this conversation. A rich heritage. Dr. Benton, could you just share with us your reflections on the impact and role of spirituality in the Black community?
You're muted, Dr. Benton.
We're going to need you to unmute.
Am I muted now?
Okay, we can hear you now. Great, thank you.
I'm sorry, all these electronics.
Yeah, I know.
I want to thank you again, Pat, for inviting me, Dr. Slater, to be a part of this town hall meeting. Dr. Slater and I are from the same generation, as are the three of us probably. And so we can certainly say that in our generation, and what we try to do is to continue to carry that same tradition now, because faith and love of God is a bedrock of our total being. Everything that we have gone through, when I say we, are not speaking about us as individuals, but I am speaking about us as a race. If we go back as far as we can go, we know that once we learn about, begin to worship and love the Lord and all of this, that has carried us through every branch of tyranny we've had to face. You really think about it. If you go back to the Negro spirituals and go back to the stories, Harriet Tubman and all these kind of things, in the foundation of that journey is that belief in God and his liberating power. And the same thing carries us right now. Unfortunately, in parts, it's becoming a little bit weakened, not at the fault of any particular person, but with all the things that are going on right now, the urgency to regalvanize ourselves in light of the reality of our faith and our honest love and trust of God to carry us through is very important. That may sound a little bit naive, but it's not meant to be that way, because that's what's carried us all the way through. And the challenge is still there. I agree. Dr. Slater said twice on Sunday and on Wednesday, and I said it went more than that too. I never will forget, I had a little lady, Mrs. Terry P. Ward, who died a few years after I came home. Every Saturday, she had teenage boys to her house, and we had lessons every Saturday, all the way through high school. And when I drove home with my wife and new baby from Seattle, I drove back to Little Rock. I wasn't in my parents' house 5 minutes. And my mother told me, Mrs. Ward's been waiting to see you. I made my first house call within 10 minutes of being back home. Okay. So, and that's been a long time ago, but the impact that she had on my life is just sustaining. And so part of the spirituality piece then says that we have to have an impact in the lives of people that we see. And sometimes we don't realize the impact until years later.
That is so true. And all of us are peers. We grew up during that same era, and the consistency across communities, the organic experience that we had in our communities and in our church life has made an indelible impression in our lives. Individuals who may have had limited economic resources, but definitely were rich in human capital beyond what you could put a price tag on. So that is part of our heritage that we bring to our respective professions and to our community right now. And that study that you mentioned about 78% of Blacks are Protestant, even though things have changed, and I don't have the statistics, but there are not as many young African American pulling away from the church as we see with other groups. The church is still a sustaining force for our young generation. Both of you bring a unique perspective to our discussion tonight. As faith leaders and physicians, what a combination to have that hybrid background that you bring to your respective work and that you bring to this discussion tonight. For the next few minutes, I would like each of you to explore that intersection between spirituality and the physical medical health of the individual, and the intersectionality of spirituality and the mental health of the individual. And as they say in the Black Baptist Church, we're all Baptists, just come to us in your own way as you explore that intersectionality of your respective disciplines with spirituality. And let's start out with you, Dr. Benton, with this question. Let's start out with the medical, physical, and we'll ease into the mental, emotional.
Thank you very much. I spent many years studying this point. There are several models that I can bring up that has been studied and been proven with the connection between spirituality and medicine. Some of the very early models looked at cancer, particularly breast cancer. And what they have found out, in short, are several things. Number one, people who have a definite with their faith, their prayer life, their worship life, live longer than people who have disconnected. Number two, when they draw blood and they look at tumor fighting cells and other mediators of the immune system, people of faith, people who pray, people who continue with their church life actually produce more tumor fighting cells than those who have disconnected. This has been studies been repeated several times. Then we carry that a little bit further and we say, okay, and this is not a segue to the mental health, but it's a fact. If you look at individuals who are under intense stress, they produce a lot of what's called cortisol. And what happens is it affects the part of the brain that affects cognition and leads to depression. And that's why antidepressants work in part because it reduces cortisol. So my point is that there's been quite a big body of research to show that there's a connection between spirituality and physical as well as mental health. Sometimes individuals will think that, well, it's a hoax, that just prayer is that's just something you do. If you go to church, that's something you do. Well, I hope tonight we dispel that it is not a myth. If you keep your spirituality up, and guess what? This transcends anything about what your denomination is. This is not a denominational specific finding. I don't care what you are. If your faith remains intact and your spirituality remains intact, these same studies have been shown to cross-section over different faiths. So I don't want to get into the different nuances of faith beliefs. That's not what this is all about. I think we're talking about just the simple fact that there's a tie between one's spirituality and the outcome from the medical piece. Go ahead. Go ahead, Pat.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead, please.
No, I was going to say that what then becomes important is another part of this, and I hope it's not leading to a segue to another topic that you had, but I think it's important to put it here. Spirituality then can be utilized in a way that has never been designed to be used. Let me give you an example. Many years ago, I had a patient that had severe high blood pressure and kidney disease. And she went to church and she told me that her pastor prayed for her and pronounced that she was no longer sick. She came to office on Monday morning. Her blood pressure was very high. And so I asked her a very simple question. I said, can you tell me anywhere in scripture when Jesus pronounced a healing, did you find evidence that it's not healed? She said, of course not. Everywhere Jesus says you heal, you are absolutely healed. I said, your blood pressure is still up. I said, I'm not discussing what your pastor said. I'm only to say that you're not healed. Well, of course, she left the practice and never came back, but she was dead about 6 months later. That's a terrible story, isn't it? That's called spiritualizing illness. They're spiritualizing COVID-19 right now. I've heard patients say to me, I won't get it because God got this. I won't get it because if when I go, it's my time anyway. So then you can actually cut off your blessings by spiritualizing it, which is entirely different than utilizing the connection between spirituality and medicine and the disconnect.
And I do want you to say more about that a little bit later on. And I'm glad that you gave that prelude to a relevant topic that we're all concerned about. That the information that you shared, the empirical research findings is very powerful in terms of empirical evidence showing the connection between spirituality and one's physical health and well-being. Dr. Slater, let's look now at the intersectionality of spirituality and mental health. Now, for a number of years, we didn't talk about mental health in the Black community for obvious reasons.
I think Harold definitely did give a segue. For one thing, there is no question that the same type of research that shows that you have better mental health has been going on for at least the past 30 years if you are involved in your spiritual practices. And he's absolutely right. Those things that happen in your brain that provide for improved mental health will happen in your brain if you engage in spiritual practices, regardless of what that spiritual tradition is. And that's why when we talk about spirituality, we're not talking about religion. We're talking because religion is an organized group of doctrines. But when we think about spirituality, we're talking about people who they've made their personal decision. They developed their faith. They're doing their search for their own personal meaning in their lives, and they live their lives in light of those facts. So over the past 30 years, like he says, there's numerous books and more coming out every day, where religious people will clearly have, if they do get a mental illness, and being religious doesn't protect you from getting a mental illness. You still got the same physical brain up here that everybody else does. Then that illness does not tend to be as severe, and it does not tend to last as long. And that's true whether it's a depression, and even in patients who have severe mental illness like schizophrenia and bipolar. If they're actively engaged in a spiritual practice, then they tend to have a better outcome. So I think it's really important to talk about the fact that being spiritual does not protect you from getting a mental illness. And one of the things that people have asked me over and over in my life as someone who is a psychiatrist, well, Dr. Slater, what do you think about, the story about the man who is psychotic? Well, I'm thinking he's psychotic. He's doing things that look psychotic to me, throwing himself in the grave, and then Jesus just comes up and heals him. And it took me many years to come to an understanding that Satan has power. And if Jesus can heal a physical body, Satan can give it an illness, just like he did to Job. So those spiritual forces going on around us does not negate the fact that we can have physical illness. And when people say, well, I can just pray about it, Harold, I say, well, what you might need to be praying for is that God will send you somebody with the wisdom to make the right decisions about your medications or the right decisions about your therapeutic tools. Because even though people get sick, God could heal it immediately, but he gave us hospitals. So I'm not trained for 40 years for nothing. I might have been sent to you for this various point in time. So when I think back over our spiritual time and the interaction between what sometimes goes on in our church communities, if people say, you know, we can do all things through him who strengthens us. Yes, he can, but he can also use our methods. And like I said, I might be that method. Dr. Griffin might be that method. I have had so many episodes where someone has called me on the phone and given me the exact thing that I need for the patient that came in day after tomorrow. And I know that's a spiritual thing. And so we know, um, those of us who are engaged in our spiritual practice know that so many positive things have happened to us that we couldn't have possibly orchestrated. And so many potentially negative things have been avoided. So when I think about mental illness, I think, okay, so what goes on in the brain when you are involved in spiritual practices? Well, there are networks, there are groups of nerves in our bodies that control our emotions, that control our anxiety. And Dr. Benton was talking about the stress hormones. If you see, I'm going to say a tarantula because I'm scared of spiders. If a tarantula hopped up here on my desk right now, and I figured out that it's a plastic tarantula, my stress hormones can go down because I realized this is not really a danger. However, in this pandemic, and in this time of unrest, the social unrest in these economic times, I think every single one of us now knows somebody who has lost their job or someone who has been seriously ill because of COVID. Well, we've been in over a year of this chronic stress. Well, those stress hormones are not going down. So those stress hormones, like he says, they decrease your cognition. They make it where you respond much more impulsively to a little threat. And all those physical problems that he talked about, high blood pressure and diabetes, all those things are stress related. We didn't always know that, but we do now. So when I talk about spiritual fortitude, I actually did some reading, and I'm going to say this man's name because I love it. How God changes your brain. What actually happens when you do a spiritual practice. And those spiritual practices will, we have two things that goes on in our brain. There's something that we call a default mode network. Everybody's got one. We go around ruminating over and over. We keep thinking about things, we're running things through our brain, and we get nowhere. It's all this self-critic that's going on in our brains. Spiritual practices quietens that. And if that's quietened, we have less depression, we have less anxiety. Our spiritual practices make it much more easy for us to talk with each other without getting angry at each other. The moment that an angry face comes to you, it's going to trigger anger in your brain. So anger can never solve a problem. Spiritual practices help you to be able to deal with those kinds of things. And on the other side of that, your spiritual practices actually stimulate your pleasure centers in your brain. It's the same centers that get stimulated when you fall in love. So if your spiritual practices on the one hand are improving your ability to have pleasure, to decrease anxiety, and on the other hand, reducing this crazy thinking, then that's how they help us. Now, it's obviously just 15,000 times more extensive than that. But there are two things in this pandemic that are just so important. We talk about social distancing. That's an unfortunate term because social distancing leads to anxiety. And when people are lonely, our new Surgeon General was actually Obama's Surgeon General for about a year and a half. And he just wrote a book on loneliness. And he says that people who are lonely are just as likely to have a shortened lifespan as people who smoke. half a pack of cigarettes a day. So loneliness is very detrimental to your health. The term should have been physical distancing.
Right, and
You
that's
can
a term
stay
that
6
I've
feet
heard.
apart
Yes.
without social distancing. We can still keep in touch with each other. People who are lonely don't take their medicine. They don't go to the doctor as much. They have higher rates of cognitive disease, and their cognition just gradually gets worse. And I'm gonna stop there because
Well, you have, both of you have brought so much to the table in terms of the intersectionality between physical, medical health, and mental health. There's a lot of depth there. And I'm reminded about that scripture that states that we are fearfully and wonderfully created. You know, our DNA includes our heart, our soul, our mind, our bodies. We are just now at the point that we're able to study this scientifically and collect data empirically. But this is what we have brought into the world from the very beginning. And thanks to medical science and psychiatry and psychology, we are understanding the science that operates within our mind and within our body, which is empowering. And I think our ancestors knew this all along, because that was all they had to depend upon. And our spirituality is something that we brought here from Africa. We had a relationship with the divine. We knew that connection between the mind and the spirit. I never will forget that I had a situation to work with someone from Africa. I don't know where this person came from, and it may have been somebody you referred, Harold, I don't know, but he came to my office and he had this catharsis. And he realized that he was a spirit housed within a body. He said, I'm spirit. And he knew that that was the answer to whatever that struggle was. I haven't seen him since. I don't even remember his name, but that was very powerful to me. And that's something that our ancestors from Africa have known all along, by the way, could you give us the author of that book that you mentioned, Annette? Could you give us the name and author of that book again?
How God Changes Your Brain.
Mm-hmm.
The author is Andrew Neuenberg, and he has about 10 books out on this subject, but this one to me was the easiest one for lay people to read.
All right, thank you. And we'll see if we can post that on our Facebook page. Harold, I would like let's go back to a topic you raised earlier, and that is the vaccine. There is a lot of anxiety in our communities about this vaccine. And as a physician and faith leader, a pastor, how would you address this question of the vaccine? Whether to or not, or what words of advice can you give us on that question?
First, I usually tell my patients and people at church, part of the history, that never in the history of medicine that I can think of personally, and the Lord had it so fixed that researchers were doing work on this kind of virus long before it showed up in Wuhan, China. And they're vaccine manufacturing people already. So when it shows up, the Lord has graced them with the ability to do something that's absolutely miraculous as far as I'm concerned. Develop not one vaccine, but more than one, have it tested in thousands of people and placed in the arms of people in less than 12 months. Many of us, the three of us here, probably remember getting the sugar cube polio vaccine. Do you remember that? And so many of our peers and others were crippled from polio. And it took Jonas Salk quite a while for that vaccine to get developed. And I can remember the huge change that occurred in people once that vaccine was developed. If you look at the COVID-19, the numbers of new cases by and large are on a decline. They're not where they need to be, but they most certainly are nothing like it was this time last year when they had trucks out in New York loaded with bodies, refrigerated trucks. Last Easter, most of us had dinner with our spouses or whoever lived in our house because we didn't want to get COVID or spread it. We're all scared about it. So I tell the people, I said, we've been praying to the Lord for over a year about this thing, praying mightily. People are getting sick. I spent more time on my knees praying this year than I have. And I pray all the time, but I wake up praying, go to sleep praying for people in my own church who got COVID and this kind of thing. And we talk about the woman with the issue of blood and just touch the hem of his garment. I've used this a lot. I said, if you're praying for the hem of the garment, and it's right over there in a vaccine. I say, you can touch the hem or you can leave it alone. If the woman with the issue of blood didn't have the faith to go over and touch Jesus' hem, she would still have a disease in terms of this. So my point is you have faith, but the Lord so has given us an opportunity to be protected against a disease. So then we have two things we got to look at. Faith, do we believe God? Two, do we believe this is the answer to a prayer? Personally, I think it is. And I've said that. And I meant that. Because as a physician, I've seen and I'm still seeing a lot of people who've had COVID. They've gotten over it, but they're not really over the effects. I'm still treating them. They have not returned back to work yet. I have a 19-year-old patient who had a blood clot to her heart, blood clot to her lungs, a blood clot to her leg, and a blood clot to her brain. She's on a ventilator, tracheostomy. She has a feeding tube, paralyzed on her left side, and had a below-the-knee amputation 2 weeks ago. She's 19. I tell that story because it's a very sad story. And we talk about this plus a lot of other individuals. Now the Lord has sent a solution. The person has a decision to make. Do I trust God or do I trust the vaccine? Or do I trust the virus? The virus can kill you. The vaccine won't. And so what I do, Dr. Griffin, is that I present the hard facts to the person. And I tell them, you're the one that got to decide. Now they ask me, have you had yours? As I had mine, the first time I knew it was available, I hijacked it. I called a friend of mine, Dr. Derek Lewis, who told me he had his vaccine. I said, how'd you get it? He told me. At 6:30 the next morning, I was over at Baptist Hospital. I had no appointment. I told him who I was and I wanted the shot. That was in December. And so I had mine. So I tell my patient, yes, I've had it. Yes, my arm was sore. I'm fine. I feel fine. And so I just tell them, you got to decide whether you trust God or not.
And of course, we respect the autonomy of the individual, but I think coming from a physician who is a faith leader, a pastor, a religious figure in our community can have an impact. And thank you for addressing that during our town hall tonight, because there are a lot of people who are still struggling with this, and hopefully this will give them some encouragement. I've been notified that we have some questions through Facebook, and Dr. Holmes, would you open your mic, please, and share with our panelists the questions that you're getting from Facebook. This is so rich, so rich. Dr. Holmes.
It is, absolutely. We have several people who are joining us on Facebook. So thank you for the Facebook audience, those who are joining. So we have a question. We have a viewer. He said he's here from John Brown University. He has a couple of questions. So it's a two-part question. How can we get the Black church to advocate more for mental health awareness? So that's part one. Part two is, how can we create an environment with the church that recognizes and supports the Black mental health community?
Thank you, Dr. Holmes.
And just so you know, we just have one more question after that, but that's the first one.
All right, well, let's address that one first, because that was one that I wanted Dr. Slater to address. For years, we've not had individuals who have been culturally competent. We've not had people to look like us providing the service. So Dr. Slater, let's hear your response to this very relevant question, because we've all been in churches where they said, if you have to go and see a psychiatrist, is something wrong with your spirituality? We've heard that. But fortunately, things are beginning to change. So enlighten us, Dr. Slater. And you need to unmute. You need to unmute. Dr. Slater, you need to unmute. Okay. Dr. Holmes, can you unmute her? I think she's having some problems with her microphone.
Am I unmuted yet?
Now, yes, yes.
Yeah, you know, that really is a powerful question. And I do not think that I have an answer for it, but I do know that when someone from the pulpit says, if you have enough faith, if you just prayed about it, they are not saying that they want you to suffer. That's coming from a position of just not having enough information. And Dr. Griffin, and still in this entire state, I can only think of 10 Black psychiatrists. And when I see your organization, I see how many psychologists there are. They just don't have this information. One of the things that, you know, as we've studied and we see that if your patient has an African-American psychiatrist, the very fact that they can develop a relationship with you, that they feel like you hear them, that you have some understanding of where they're coming from, that is such a powerful tool, even if I choose not the absolute best medication for them at that moment, because we don't have trust that the larger population has or even want to get to know us. They keep a distance from us. The people that I know so many pastors now who have training. I actually know some pastors that are better therapists than I am. So it's not something, I think it's something that needs to happen on the union district level. We need to have more people educated in larger settings, not something that can happen in an individual church.
Thank you for that. And one of our colleagues, Dr. Tiffany Haynes, who is a professor at the UAMS College of Public Health, has been working with Dr. Kanisha Bryant in East Arkansas. And they have empowered these African-American ministers. And I have been so encouraged by the work that they have been doing. It's been long and laborious, those long trips to East Arkansas, but they can talk the lingo. They can bring their congregations together. So there are some signs that we see occurring. And one of the things that I think is also important, and that's something that Dr. Holmes and I are involved in our association, the Arkansas Psychological Association. Both of us are on the Professional Development Committee, and we bring in, we recommend, and we've been very successful in bringing in speakers addressing health disparities, cultural differences, the importance of social justice issues, and really working with our peers to try to raise their knowledge and sensitivity level about working with the African-American community. We have hosted events and they've attended. So that's another responsibility that we've taken on as well. But we have a lot of work to do, a lot of work to do. Dr. Holmes, do you have another question for us?
Yeah, so there was another question. For those of you who are mental health practitioners, how, if at all, do you incorporate a patient's spiritual practice into their psychotherapy experience?
And I'm going to broaden that question because that's going to get to some tips. I want to broaden that to include not only mental health, but also physical health in terms of that connection. What are some tips that each of you can give us on that question, please. You want to repeat the question, Dr. Holmes?
Okay, yes, I can. It says for those of you who are mental health practitioners, how, if at all, do you incorporate a patient's spiritual practice into their psychotherapy experience?
Dr. Griffin, I think that's a question for you.
I'm the moderator, not a panelist.
Because we're not
All right,
psychotherapists.
I have had patients to call and ask me if I'm a spiritual therapist. And I respond by saying, I am not a spiritually trained therapist. I am a psychologist who is spiritual, and that's a part of my background. And if the person is looking specifically for someone who's going to offer spiritual advice, I have people that I refer to, and I have used chaplains. Unfortunately, some of the chaplains have retired, and I need to find another panel. But if they're looking for someone specifically to work with them through scripture or whatever, I have resources that I recommend. And on another note, in terms of just who I am, all three of us grew up in the Black Baptist Church, so we can pull out scriptures to apply to whatever situation it is we're dealing with. That's part of our armamentarium that we use to work with patients. And it is a resource. It's a part of who we are. It's our lived experience. And we bring all of who we are into our respective settings, be it psychiatry, medicine, psychology, and that Black community has put that within us, and we are given back through our respective practices. But to answer the question, I don't market myself as a spiritual therapist, but if they want someone to really just advise them spiritually, I have resources that I recommend.
And I want to add, as a psychiatrist, we sometimes have a lot more difficult situations because the patient may bring the major symptom and he's gotten his religious beliefs mixed up in a psychosis. About 25 to 35% of schizophrenics will have a religious belief that cannot be true. And almost 15% of bipolars. So just because somebody tells me, they come in and they say, the Lord told me this. Well, it's going to be a lot more than just the Lord told me this for me to think this is a disorder, because that's a way that people speak in my community. The Lord told me this. So they may say, the Lord told me that I can fly off this 2-story building. It's not likely that the Lord is going to tell them that, but they're going to have something else going on besides this statement that seems impossible. They're going to be more agitated. They can't sleep. They're going to be, disorganized in their thinking. So I have to tease apart, is this something that is normally said in our culture? When I hear people say, my loved one came and talked to me, that happens so often. People have that experience, and yet there's nothing else going wrong. That's not a psychosis. So I have to look at the whole person before I up and say, you have a psychiatric disorder, because it just could be a spiritual manifestation for them.
Right, exactly. Dr. Ben, I would like for you to address that from the medical perspective in terms of the patient who may be non-compliant with the medicine and thinking that, God, like you mentioned earlier, God is going to heal me. How do you reconcile? How do you mitigate that challenge with your patients?
Let me, I'm gonna discuss the whole thing. I will bring that up too.
Okay.
One thing I've learned in the spirituality and medicine arena, it's important to get the patient's permission to bring up the spiritual, because not everybody wants you to do it. So even though I'm a pastor, and perhaps many patients know that I am, I never advertise that I am. I'd rather you figure I know the Lord by my walk and my talk rather than my title. But I will always ask the person, may I put on my pastor's hat? I've never had somebody say no, but that's letting them know that now I have discovered that the nature of your problem is more spiritual and not physical. As a primary care physician, many patients that come to the office with issues I've discovered is more spiritual than physical, and their solution is not a prescription for the pharmacy. It's really in the text. And what I'll take the time to do is discuss the whole problem from the physical standpoint, discuss it from the spiritual standpoint, pull out the scripture and explain that to them, and then tell them, now this is how I suggest you handle the problem from the physical, spiritual standpoint. I've done this so much that many patients will come to the office and say, okay, I need my spiritual prescription before I go. But that's very important because not everybody, by the time the person, Pat, I've referred them to you, Dr. Slater sees them, they have a definite mental health type issue that requires a mental health professional, and that's beyond my scope of practice. And Pat, I will send them to you. I will let them know that you are just the kind of person that they need. I don't tell them anything about your spiritual nature. I say, trust me, you'll be satisfied. And
Thank you.
I do that. I do that. Now, the other part of your question is this: when the patient starts to spiritualize the illness, and I call spiritualizing attributing to God what you want him, how he wants to answer your prayer without consulting with him, right? So if you decide, I don't have this illness, I will not get COVID, I will not get anything, God's going to take care of me, all these things, then my question is, I will ask them, okay, you need to give me some more meat. Tell me how you know that's going to happen. I would engage. I will not box them into a corner, try to make them feel badly, but I want them to eat, to have some kind of measure of sustaining power for what they're believing. Then I'm going to go ahead and tell them from the medical standpoint that other side that they need to know. But one thing I will always do, I will never tell a patient, I will no longer take care of you because you have this thought. The door always remains open. So if it turns out that you realize that it didn't work out the way you want to, you can always come back. I never left you. But in our society, people spiritualize. That's part of it. They've been doing it forever. But I think as a primary care physician, and I realize both Annette and Pat, that I'm in a very unique position. Not many physicians are pastor physicians.
That is so true.
That is very rare.
Very true.
And so I realize that what I'm doing is entirely different. Another way I use spirituality, if I diagnose a person with cancer, I will always tell the patient what I just said at first about your practice, your spiritual life, your prayer life, these things, keep that up, you will live longer. I always have prayer with them, and I always send them to a surgeon, the best one in the state if I can find, that loves the Lord. Ronnie Henry Tillman or UMS. Okay, I always, she knows that I will do that. And then I follow them up to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do with their spiritual lives. Okay, because I think I know there's a connection there. And here again, I'm in an unusual situation, and I realize that. So I cannot translate what I'm doing to another person because that would be wrong. But I agree with the both of you, Annette, when you talked about the physicians in East Arkansas and the churches in East Arkansas to try to at least arm the pastors and other spiritual leaders into the same paradigm with spirituality and medicine, because they see these people every day. They're at the bedside praying. They see them on Sundays and Wednesdays and other times. So they need to be armed with the same knowledge. And as you said, some of them are very good counselors, and many of them are. So you don't have to be a physician to give someone some concrete, good spiritual information and have the ability to let them know you need to go see a mental health professional. There was a question asked a few moments ago about the mental health and pastors. Here again, I realize I'm in a very unique position, but I know the medical and so I have no problems engaging them and saying, you need a mental health professional here. This is not something that a scripture is going to fix. And I recommend you go do this and you do that. You can't spiritualize mental illness. It's it's like high blood pressure, diabetes, the other kind of things. Many of them can be inherited. And I'll tell the person, look, I've been taking care of your family for 40 years. All y'all got anxiety. So get over it. You inherited it. Now let's fix it. You follow me? I know it's kind of comical, but it's true.
So true. And again, that's where understanding the culture of our patients is so important, because that is something that we bring to the table. The combination of medicine and spirituality, psychiatry and spirituality, psychology and spirituality, and most of all, we know our heritage. We know our people, and we are committed to enhancing the quality of life for each individual in our community. The time has been well spent. The time has gone by so quickly. Let's see if we have one other question though, before I would like for you all to just give just a brief summary. We don't have but just a minute or two, so we'll need to be brief. Dr. Holmes, is there another question from the Facebook?
Yeah, no more questions at this time.
Okay, good. I'm glad that we were able to address the questions. And I just want to thank our audience for joining us. As I mentioned earlier, we have been doing this for about a year, and this is recorded. Tonight's event is recorded, and you will be able to view it again on our Facebook page and also our YouTube page. And each town hall meeting that we have sponsored is accessible. And I do want to thank Ms. Kenya Eddins. I see that she has joined us. She has been so helpful in helping us to promote these events over the year. So as we wrap this up, Dr. Slater, Dr. Benton, thank you. Thank you for being with us. And if you just give us a 30-second summary, but I don't want you all to end the meeting after our panelists provide the summary, because for just a few minutes, I want us to just listen to a brief clip. One of the tools that we use in the Black community is music. Music has been part of our healing and our spirituality. And we have just a short clip that Dr. Holmes is going to play by an African-American violinist from Cleveland, Ohio, who produced a video, YouTube. It's about 30 minutes production for this pandemic. His name is Obed Shelton. And I would just encourage you to Google Obed Shelton, violinist from Cleveland, Ohio, for this 30-minute presentation, the hymns of faith that can serve as some encouragement and inspiration. So I know it's a hard request, but if you can do a 30-second, a 30-second, Dr. Slater, and then Dr. Benton. And then we'll just listen to just a clip of Mr. Shelton's musical rendition.
Well, I would like to end by saying, since we realize that everything is rooted in our physical selves, even those parts of the brain that improve our spiritual selves, there are things that are absolutely improve those parts of the brain that improve your spirituality. The first one is faith. Nobody can know ever if you're absolutely making the wrong or right decision, but you make that leap of faith, and you really are not going to do anything until you make that leap of faith. The second one is talking to other people. When I see you, there's something in your brain that is familiar with what's in my brain. And another one, there's actually about 8 or 9, and they're all in this book that I talked about. Another one is just a plain old smile. Even if you don't mean it, it actually improves one's mental health.
Thank you, Dr. Slater. Good tips. Dr. Benton.
One, that spirituality and medicine is inextricably tied together. Try to maintain a good balance in your life. keep your prayer life and your relationship with God intact. But by all, the one thing, start your day off with the love that you have in your heart and with the conviction that you're going to do everything in your power to please the Lord. And that nothing will take your joy away. Start out with that every day. And I guarantee you, your day will not be like it would be if you did not do that.
Thank you both. This has been a very relevant, a very timely, and a very meaningful time together. And we pray God's blessings upon each of you. Now, Dr. Holmes, will you close us out with Obed Shelton?
My apologies. 1 second. Let me try that again.
All right. And if we're not able to, let's see.
There she goes.
Amen and hallelujah. I feel
Yeah,
like
yeah,
going
yeah.
on.
Thank you, Glenn. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
Dr. Holmes, are we off Facebook? Dr. Holmes?